Paul calls us to work out our salvation, obeying God with deep reverence and fear. He says that in Philippians chapter 2, verse 12. To work that salvation out daily. It's not a matter of us working at ourselves, but coming and interacting with God for Him to change us. During this time of Passover and unleavened bread, we come back to remind us of the daily critical processing of the fact that change needs to happen, how it's going to take place. That he talks about in Ephesians 2, 8 through 10. It's Him doing it. Jesus is the one who changes. He's the one who saves us, and He's the one who changes our lives. This is not a self-help religion. This is not something that's built on ourselves and us doing it. It's a matter of Him doing it. That we live our lives based on what Jesus is doing in the whole picture. As we passionately love Him and open ourselves to Him, He changes us from the deep things inside of our lives. This is why that unleavened bread feast is tied to the Passover feast. The leaven or sin comes out by Jesus doing this thing in us. As we eat matzah bread for those 7 days, it's a time of journeying with Jesus in the desires of His heart. He desires to purify us. In Ephesians 5, he talks about with purifying us with the water of His Word. And so as we spend that time with the Word, it goes back to the Hebrews 4 picture where He comes and He divides that, the difference between what is pure and what is impure, to take out the impure things in our lives, that leaven, that sin. As He speaks to us, it's like water that cleanses us in a bath or in a shower. Eating this unleavened bread causes our body to crave the leaven and its sweetness. In the same way, as we go through this process with Jesus, there's a battle that rages inside of us. And it's a battle for the sweetness of sin. A battle for all the things that we crave and our body craves. Romans 8 tells us that our spirit has been redeemed, but our body hasn't been. And so our body, the flesh, is craving the sin, craving to move in the things that are against what God desires. Everybody has those things. Everybody has those battles. None of us are exempt. But it's a matter of coming to Christ and asking Him to do that transformation. The Messiah who knew no sin took on our sin. The third part of the festival we'll be looking at in just a few minutes. But I want you to think about and to consider the Feast of Unleavened Bread and how that ties to Passover. Jesus was there to redeem. He's the one who paid the price, the blood that was shed for that redemption. And the whole picture of the unleavened bread looks at His continued work. So it was His death, is what the Passover blood shares. The Feast of Unleavened Bread helps us to understand that daily work that He does inside of our lives, the daily cleansing. And so it brings us back to that one point each year of how it's such a priority for us to look to God to do that change in our lives. So consider this. Ponder this. Look at understanding the reason He established it back then in the Old Testament, the reason He reinforced it in the New Testament, is for us today to continue to walk in it and to really come back to it that once a year. Then as we move in our home churches, to be able to discuss those different things. And it becomes the culture of us taking that point and then how are we going to process? How are we going to spend time in the Word for each other, listening to God for each other, of those things that need to be transformed in our lives, that sin that needs to be dealt with. That takes time. It's not an instantaneous kind of thing. Sometimes God does that, but it's very rare. Usually He wants us to be involved with the body, confessing our sins one to another, that He talks about in James chapter 5 is what He's talking about here. James just opens up that picture to us of understanding that unleavened bread, that leaven that's in our lives that has to be changed into unleavened. That sin in our lives that has to be transformed. And God is the only one that can do it. But He needs each other. He has us walking with each other to help us stay pointed and focused on Jesus who can do that work inside of us. So think about this, okay?